Good evening. I feel like I don't really need to introduce you guys. You have worked in business, you've worked in politics, you have interacted with big companies, with big investors. There are many business leaders here in the audience with us. I feel like the place where it would be good to clarify things. We are on day 5 of COP. There's another 10 days left. Well, maybe less. But we have had 100,000 people come here. Many of them are business leaders, many of them are finance leaders. Let's start with Claire. Why do you think business needs to be here? Given what happens at a COP typically is government setting out a long-term agenda that will maybe eventually get to a local government in some policy that will maybe eventually affect a business. Why do they need to be here to see what governments are doing?
Well, thank you. Great to be here. Can I just take a moment to help the audience understand, if they don't already know, sort of what COP is? And in truth, I led several UK government COP delegations without actually really understanding what it was. And it wasn't until I spent some time trying to organise COP26 that I kind of got it. And what we have to remember is COP is like an onion. And at the core of the onion is the ongoing negotiations of the T's and C's around the UN Framework Convention, 190 plus parties signed up to all those years ago. And that is an unbelievably closed, highly technical, often very contentious process where countries will continue to reiterate their red lines year after year, and it results in a text. That's all it does. So the whole jamboree is designed really to provide an updated text. And of course, the most famous text is the Paris Agreement, where we came up with a shared landing zone. Glasgow was where we closed the rule book that showed how we operationalized. There are some that say, why are we still negotiating? What's happening? If you read the Glasgow Declaration, which is 8 pages, do you know how many times it mentions the word business? 0. So that core of the ecosystem doesn't frankly really care whether we are all here or not. It wants to get on and negotiate, and it will do so fearsomely. And there are some parts of that text, think about the row over phase down or phase out of coal, that have a material impact on the action agenda that's going forward. Wrapped around the onion is layer upon layer of stuff that moves closer and closer to the real world and the real economy, including an action track that was set up in Paris because the smart people running the Paris COP realized that this core of the onion was not delivering anything like the pace of action or indeed the frameworks that we needed. Fast forward to where we are now. What is becoming obvious is that the coalitions of the willing, something I think Paul and I kind of thought up a few years ago, is actually how you turn all of this shared ambition into action. You can't transform an economy, particularly a global economy, where 82% of energy consumed is still from fossil fuel sources. Yeah. It was 85% when we got going on this. You cannot transform that economy by UNFCCC, by national government regulation, or by the private sector. It has to be an integration. And a business's role, I will finish on this, is to act as a catalyst, is to act as a reality check, and essentially show what is possible and what they're prepared to fund. And that is what I think is happening. This is a very pivotal moment in COP. I think this is a highly successful COP to date. And actually having the business leaders here is hugely important for that.
Well, it's also a time when, given the macro trends of where things stand today, with high inflation, high interest rates, there has been many companies pulling back on green goals. And some of that's happening because of investors, because they want more returns. And right now, say, investing more in fossil fuels is the thing that will get you more returns. So, Paul, you've run many businesses that have gone on to be a leader in creating a climate action plan and deliver on many of those goals. What is it when shareholders come to you and say, well, right now, ease a little?
Yeah, I would, in due respect, I would make one small correction. It's not that any transition of this magnitude that Claire has talked about is not a smooth line. It is sometimes 2 steps backwards, sometimes 1 step forwards, but hopefully more steps forwards than backwards in the process, and that is what we're currently going through. So it's not surprising that when you have this geopolitical tension all coming together, that some markets get disturbed. Partly, by the way, because we haven't taken some of this conversion serious enough, early enough. But, and as a result, some have a windfall on a short period of time, and the fossil fuel companies certainly have benefited from that. Not by their own doing or by being smarter in their strategies, but just simply because our global system wasn't quite prepared for the shock that was coming. But the reality is, it's not that people pull back, actually. If you look at the macro numbers globally, always exemptions, but if you look at the macro numbers, our green investments, $1.8 trillion this year, was $1.1 trillion last year. That's up more than 50%. We see continued acceleration in things like solar, up 60% this year again, or obviously electric vehicles and many other things. It is really what is happening more than that, with some of the attacks from the political side that we now see, because these issues, as you can imagine, are politicized. Would actually be naive to think they're not. But, and with some of the temporary shocks that some people have probably taken the ambition out. I'm more worried about that. Less willing to speak up, less willing to go together to set bolder objectives, less willing to accelerate their companies into the discomfort zone. So we definitely see in that sense a slowing down temporarily, I hope, of the direction we need to take. But why is business here? And Claire and I have been at it for a long time. I remember the first Rio conference I was in 1992. There were about 3 or 4 business people. If I may be honest, there were 7. And that was the origin of the World Business Council that Claire is still advising on, and obviously has helped the Business Council organize itself around this agenda. Fast forward, when we had Rio plus 20, you know, it was over half in Paris. We had far more business people at the COP21 than we had people representing governments. And you see the same happening here.
Yeah.
What is happening? The sense of urgency is higher. I think people understand that. The agenda is a little bit broader now. It isn't just a narrow energy transition. There's health, there's food transition, there is a just transition, finally a people element has crept in. And actually, most of them are here because they see the opportunities.
Right.
And they're working together to accelerate that.
But let's talk about the political backsliding, which perhaps in one intense way is happening in the UK. You were part of the Conservative Party. It was the party that set the net zero target in 2019.
I brought it in 2019. We were the first developed country in the world to legislate for net zero.
And over the past 6 months, there have been some policy changes, largely rhetorical remarks made by Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. When you look back at your time in the Conservative Party and you look at the Conservative Party now, why do you think they are going in the wrong direction?
Well, I just want to make it where I no longer belong to any political party, because I have found in my new life of working with global businesses and NGOs, it's not unbelievably helpful to be a card-carrying member. But I do still work with the current government and other political parties. Look, I think that the obvious answer is because someone in number 10 thinks that they will win some votes by going soft on green crap. Sorry, to quote a former UK Prime Minister. And, you know, oddly, when you look at what the Prime Minister is rowing back from, those targets that were put in place by Prime Minister Johnson are completely extreme. And my assumption is he made that with absolutely no advice from his civil servants. He just wanted to spaff some targets up the wall to look like the big man in town. Quote, that's his words, not mine. And so I don't think the Prime Minister is wrong to take a look at them and see if they're achievable. What I think is wrong is to politicize the transition, because one of the things we really worked very hard on in my time in office was to truly build cross-party consensus, take the advice of the Climate Change Committee and try and build a consensus, because this is a 50-year investment process. You know, unless you've got political buy-in, unless you've actually got the certainty that the political environment won't change, it's really hard to get investment. And so what is happening now is not so much the politics, it's just that investors are saying, you know, whether or not they license the North Sea rounds, do I really want to spend that extra buck in the UK, or are there other much more stable policy environments I can invest in?
Well, the UK election is supposed to come up sometime in the next 12
May.
months. We will see. Oh, May. You're
May, we
making a
think.
prediction. There
I
you
am.
go.
I'm not predicting the
We have a
result.
prediction here. An early election.
By no means
But
sure.
there are other elections that have happened this year that we should talk about. Paul, maybe speak about the Netherlands. Speak about Argentina. There is a right-wing surge in politics, and much of that right wing is attached to climate denialism, or if not, climate delayism.
Yeah, well, we've seen obviously some big swings in countries like the US, where the IRA has made a fundamental difference from where the previous administration was. We had just had meetings yesterday, day before yesterday, with President Lula and his Minister of Finance Haddad, and it's a totally different conversation now that is starting to give some clarity towards investments in Brazil in a direction. We've seen the same in Australia, where we had basically one of the main obstructors of the climate process has become actually a very helpful country moving the process forward. So yeah, then at the same time as we're not addressing many of the issues, often related actually to not addressing the sustainable development goals, related to the growing inequality, related to the increasing burdens of climate change, you see people being dissatisfied in their leaders in many cases, then being exploited by populists. In my native country, the Netherlands, although I've been out of that for a long time, you know, it's a terrible housing shortage. The same in the UK. And, you know, why do all the foreigners that come in get the houses right away and we have to wait? It's a very populist thing. Why should we elect politicians that prevent us from eating hamburgers? It's a very popular thing to say. Or if things go wrong, blame Brussels, let's get out. So for these little sound bites, we're able to rally people. But then you look at the actual policies or when they get into government or what needs to be implemented, I'm not so sure that the people that voted for them are actually being served by their policies. So we are at a difficult period. I mean, the previous speaker was talking about us having to invest 7% of our GDP in this conversion. In fact, the numbers are $3 to $4 trillion if we do it consistently, so it's slightly less in incremental spend, but we're already incurring now far more.
Right.
We're spending 7.1 trillion in per first subsidies on fossil.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. So if you look at the costs that we are incurring, it is definitely already higher than what it would cost us to drive this conversion. My most striking number, and which is my last one, you know, this world currently spends 10 to 12% of its GDP on conflict prevention and wars. Sadly enough, the numbers are going up. And the main reason, if you peel the onion, of the 10 to 12%, twice as much as implementing the total sustainable development goals, is because we are so slow in doing what we know is the right thing to do.
Would you let me just build on that just for a moment? Because I think there's this question of how do you take the challenge and the opportunity down to the individual? How do you double click on all of these clever conversations and NDCs and, you know, stuff that we talk about? How do you make it relevant? And I think we have failed miserably, actually, in making this relevant for your average person. And Paul ran a highly successful consumer goods company where the focus was, yes, on developing sustainable products, but also making products that were fun to use, gave a better result. You know, we've sort of, I sometimes find the whole climate debate is quite elitist. You know, we talk about, for example, we need to remove carbon, huge amounts of carbon at scale, and I'm hands up on the board of an oil and gas company that is doing that at scale. But when you talk to indigenous people who want to be the ones planting the trees, restoring the soils, they will say, where is the money? Why isn't it coming through to us? We want to do this. We don't want you to be arguing about compliance versus voluntary markets. Just basically make this flow to us. And so this process of democratizing this transition, it has failed, which is why, as Paul says, we're getting the backlash.
But one reason to talk politics with business leaders is because it's not just that business leaders are affected by what happens in politics, but that you're also able to make difference in the politics. There is immense lobbying power that businesses have to make changes happen.
But
and
also
you've brought those businesses together to do the right thing. So what have been the lessons, given where we are with the challenges that we face, that you draw, and this is the last question, draw maybe 3 lessons each that would allow businesses to actually go?
So we're jumping at this because we both. So I want to use an example in the UK, which was the offshore wind sector deal, where we knew we needed to massively scale up offshore wind. It's the UK's kind of renewable superpower. And we had businesses who wanted to do the development and the investment, but somehow we couldn't quite make it click. So rather than the constant kind of lobbying regulation, we got people together and said, what's it going to take to have a 10x improvement in this industry? And it took things like the UK Treasury agreeing to give a 10-year forward look on the volume of wind they wanted to buy rather than a biannual auction that maybe happened. It took developers committing certain amounts of money. I put in a gender workforce target of 30% of the workforce to be female, which has stuck. It was just a really good example of bottom-up inclusive, a kind of microcosm of what happens at COP, very focused on a particular outcome. And so and it's the same with methane now. We've seen incredible announcements on methane that now need to be operationalized. It's just a different way. It's sitting around the table with a shared goal and doing things a little differently.
Right. Paul?
Yeah, I fully agree on that one, but what business wants, and Claire already alluded to that, wants certainty and policy. And when it changes, like in the UK example, it's actually the fact that it changes does more damage than the change itself sometimes. And I think we want to be sure that costs are measured fairly and not passed on to innocent citizens that are then manipulated into voting for the wrong politicians. Yeah. So a price on carbon and consistency on policy, I think most people would want to have something like that come out of these type of negotiations. In terms of the role of business, in our book Net Positive, we talk about positive advocacy. The first thing is it's really about trust in the end of the day. If the trust is broken in society, you can't do anything. Individually, but business-wise as well. So for business leaders, the most important thing in your company is your reputation. How do you get your reputation? By walking the talk. So the most important thing is what you do, do it. There are a lot of cowboys running around the COP here that don't have any cattle. And that's a little bit unfortunate. Yeah. So that's the first message. And be in this discomfort zone. These transitions are not going to be easy. You need to be in this discomfort zone. Many are setting targets not to lose versus targets to win. And that consistency is the second thing. You need to, what you have implemented, even if it's aggressive, you need to be consistent in all your actions. Over half the companies are using trade associations to literally say something different than what they stand for. And people see through that now. We're done with that. And then the third part is you have to get involved with governments. It doesn't serve anything to blame politicians or make jokes about them, because we need them. And these people are heroic to go into politics right now. It's not their fault in the sense that so many things are broken. So I say to the business people, it's in your interest. Business cannot succeed in these failing societies, nor do I believe can they be a bystander in a system that gives them life in the first place. So they have to get involved and help de-risk that political process. How do they do this? By going together. The issues that now need to be solved are of such magnitude that none of them can do it alone. Right. So you move from competitive leadership thinking to cooperative. And I have a very simple sentence that tells you where you draw the line. When it comes to the future of humanity, I believe it's better for us to work together than compete. Yep.
Well, that's a good place to end. Thank you, Paul and Claire.
Thank you, Sid.
Thanks.
Yep, thank you.